Welcome back to the deep dive. Um, I hope you're sitting down for this one.
Yeah.
Seriously, you might want to get comfortable.
Yeah, maybe dim the lights a little bit, grab a drink.
Right, because today we're doing something a little different. Usually we take a stack of articles or a new book and we pull out the insights, but today we are essentially stepping into a time machine.
We really are. We're going back to a very specific and very heavy night in American history, but the lens we're using to look at it is, well, it's completely unique.
Totally unique.
It's not a history book. It's not a police report. It's something else
Yeah.
entirely.
We are traveling back to the night of June 5th, 1969.
A date that, if you know your history instantly, just brings a certain feeling to your gut.
Exactly. It is the night Senator Robert F. Kennedy, RFK, was shot at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles.
He had just won the California primary. The momentum for his presidential campaign was huge. And then in a kitchen pantry, everything just changed. It was a tragedy that, coming so soon after Martin Luther King Jr. and obviously years after his own brother JFK, it really felt like it broke something in the American spirit.
It felt like the end of the 60s in a way, like the end of hope. But here is where our deep dive takes a turn for you listening. We aren't looking at the news broadcasts from that night.
No, we're not.
We are looking at a transcript of a session recorded that very evening, while RFK was literally still in the hospital fighting for his life.
We're talking about the Seth Material, specifically Session 414 from the early sessions, Book 8.
Now, for anyone who might be new to this, just give us the 30-second context. Who are the actual people in the room?
Okay, so you have Jane Roberts, who is the author and the medium. She goes into a trance state and speaks for an entity known as Seth. And you have her husband, Robert Butts, usually called Rob, sitting there with a pen and paper just furiously transcribing everything Seth says. They're in Elmira, New York. It's around 9 p.m.
And before we go any further into what happened in that room, just a quick housekeeping note for everyone listening. This podcast is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We are here to explore, to learn, and to discuss.
And what a discussion this is going to be.
So set the scene for us. It's June 5th. The news is screaming about the shooting. The atmosphere in that living room must have been, suffocating.
It was heavy. Rob's notes actually mentioned that Jane had hit a bit of a low spot recently, which is totally understandable given the news.
Yeah, the national mood was basically a collective depression.
Exactly. But then she goes into trance and Seth comes through. And what is remarkable is that Seth doesn't just offer condolences or, platitudes. He offers a complete autopsy of the American soul.
An autopsy of the soul. Man, that is a chilling way to put it.
It's accurate, though.
Yeah.
And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack that autopsy. We're going to look at Seth's explanation of why nations experience violence.
The mass psyche concept.
Right, the mass psyche. And then we're going to pivot to the true crime aspect. Because Seth starts dropping really specific details about the assassination, the shooter, and the conspiracy.
Mere hours after it happened.
Hours. Details that wouldn't be public knowledge for days or even weeks.
It's the combination of high philosophy and gritty detective work that makes this session so unique. But before we get into the heavy stuff, the national trauma and the clairvoyance, we really have to talk about the vibe of the session itself.
We do.
Because you'd think, given the context, Seth would be very somber, maybe a bit grave.
You would definitely think that. But Seth is Seth.
He's sassy.
He really is. There's this fantastic moment right at the beginning that perfectly captures his personality. So Rob, Jane's husband, is sitting there during a break. Jane has popped out of trance for a moment.
Right.
And Rob is wondering aloud. He's thinking about the mechanics of this whole channeling thing. He wonders if Seth needs permission from his greater entity, his higher self, to come through and speak.
Like he needs a whole pass from the principle of the universe or something.
Exactly. He's wondering if there's a strict hierarchy. Rob even says, I didn't really mean to use the word permission, but he's clearly curious if there's a chain of command.
And how does Seth react when he comes back into the session?
He comes back loud and energetic. He leans forward, eyes wide, and he basically roasts Rob. He says, I do not need a permission slip.
I do not need a permission slip. I love that so much.
And he follows it up with this perfect analogy to explain why. He asks Rob, say, you as a personality can write and paint. Do you need the permission of your writing self in order to paint?
Wow. That is such a great way to debunk the idea that the soul is this rigid bureaucracy. It's fluid. You don't need to fill out a form in triplicate to express a different part of your own creativity.
It establishes Seth's personality so well. He's authoritative, he's witty, and he has zero patience for our human misconceptions about how reality works.
Yeah, he's basically saying, look, I'm here, I'm energetic, let's get to work.
It breaks the ice. It reminds us that even in the face of immense tragedy, the spirit is vibrant.
It's a bit of a cosmic vibe check before we descend into the darkness. And we are going to descend now, because Seth pivots from that joke straight into one of the most profound and difficult discussions about violence I've ever read.
It is difficult. It challenges a lot of our fundamental assumptions about victimhood and villainy.
So let's unpack this for you listening. Seth starts talking about the nation, specifically the United States in 1969, as if it's a single biological organism.
Right. He says nations like individuals go through cycles of emotional reactions. He's saying you can't look at a country as just a collection of laws and borders and politicians. It has a mass psyche, it has moods, it has neuroses.
And in 1969, that organism was sick.
It was poisoned. That is the exact specific metaphor Seth uses. He argues that the nation had built up this massive amount of exploding, misdirected, poorly understood aggression.
Where was that aggression coming from, though?
Everywhere. I mean, think about the era. The Vietnam War, civil rights, struggles, the massive generational divide, the counterculture clashing at the establishment. It was a pressure cooker.
Right.
And Seth explains that just like a physical body tries to vomit up poison to save the whole organism, the mass psyche tries to eject its poisonous, overdeveloped aggression.
So the violence, the riots, the assassinations, that's the vomit.
To put it bluntly, yes. Seth actually says as a physical organism tries to thrust out poisons that impede its health, so the mass psyche organism attempts to rid itself of this now poisonous, overdeveloped aggression.
Okay, I get the biological analogy. If I eat bad sushi, my body violently rejects it to save my life. But here is the hard part, the deeply uncomfortable part for us to process. In this analogy, who are the Kennedys? Who is MLK?
This is where we have to be very careful and nuanced. Seth introduces the concept of the vessel or the channel. He says that certain individuals, because of their own inner backgrounds and the challenges they've set for themselves, are peculiarly suited for this function.
They act as the outlet.
Yes. Seth says by naming the poison they attract it, they become channels through which the poison can be, to some extent, ejected.
This sounds, it sounds risky to discuss. It sounds almost like saying it's their fault they got shot.
I know, and that's a very common reaction to this material. But Seth is very clear. This isn't about blaming the victim in any moral sense whatsoever. It's about energetic dynamics.
Okay, break that down.
These figures, JFK, RFK, King, they stood up and identified the problem. They named the hate. They named the injustice. By doing that publicly and forcefully, they became lightning rods.
They drew the fire.
Precisely. They drew the hidden aggression of the mass psyche onto themselves. Seth calls it a therapeutic, almost surgical, unfortunately necessary outlet.
Surgical? That is such a cold word for murder.
It is cosmic detachment. He's speaking from a perspective outside of our physical, emotional reaction to death. He's saying that without these symptoms, without these high-profile, agonizing tragedies, the nation wouldn't know it was sick. The poison would have just stayed inside and festered.
And what would that have looked like if RFK hadn't been shot? If the aggression hadn't found that specific outlet?
Seth is terrifyingly specific about that alternative. He says the consequences for the nation and the world would be far more disastrous had these hates and aggressions not found these outlets.
Meaning what exactly?
He strongly implies that the country could have initiated a disastrous war.
A war worse than Vietnam?
Potentially, yes. Or a global conflict. The idea is that the sheer volume of aggression had to go somewhere. By focusing it on these symbolic figures, the nation was forced to stop and look at itself in horror. It prevented a total systemic collapse or a massive external projection of violence that could have ended the world.
So the assassination wasn't just a random act by a lone crazy person. In Seth's view, it was a collective act.
Yes. He says there are psychic webworks that bring the slayer and the victim together. It's a highly choreographed, energetic dance. The assassin physically pulls the trigger, but the energy behind the bullet comes from the mass psyche of the entire country. We all pulled the trigger in a metaphorical sense.
That is a very heavy burden to place on the listener, on all of us. But it leads right into the specific diagnosis Seth gives for the country. He actually uses a clinical medical term. He calls the United States schizophrenic.
A schizophrenic condition.
That.
And he's not using it lightly or as a slang term. He's referring to the profound split between the nation's ideals and its actual behavior.
The gap between who we say we are and what we actually do.
Exactly. Think about the rhetoric of the 1960s. Peace, brotherhood, equality, the American dream. Seth says the ideals were mouthed, but not believed. A holier-than-thou attitude developed into a spiritual hypocrisy.
Ouch. Spiritual hypocrisy.
It cuts really deep. We were preaching peace on the world stage while waging a brutal war. We were preaching equality while enforcing segregation at home. Seth says this profound contradiction created a mass guilt. And guilt, when it's repressed and denied, turns into aggression.
And that aggression needs a target.
And who becomes the target? The symbols of the very ideals we're failing to live up to.
The Kennedys.
Right. Seth points out the tragic paradox here. Why kill the men who represent the best of us? Because we secretly hate them for reminding us of how much we are failing. He says the victim must be, in one way or another, a symbol of those idealized qualities that the individual and the mass natives of the land give lip service to.
So killing RFK was essentially a way of killing the reminder of our own failure.
That's the psychological mechanism at play. It forces a massive crisis point. Seth says these men are showing the nation the difference between ideals and actions. Their deaths serve as a bloody mirror.
Right. When you see RFK dying on the cold floor of a hotel kitchen, you can't hide behind the holier-than-thou attitude anymore. You have to face the stark reality of the violence in your own society.
It's a wake-up call written in blood. And Seth emphasizes that the United States, precisely because of its high-stated ideals, is held to a higher standard by its own mass psyche. He says it therefore cannot afford to judge itself against others, find itself superior, and rest. We can't just say, well, at least we aren't as bad as that other dictatorship. We have to judge ourselves strictly against our own stated values.
Keep your ideals real, as we like to say on the show. But Seth is saying if you don't keep them real, reality will literally come crashing down on you to force the issue.
And that's the surgical nature of it. Returning to that word, it's incredibly painful, it's tragic, but it is a desperate attempt by the mass organism to heal the split, to integrate its own shadow.
That is a lot to process philosophically. It completely changes the way you look at history. It's not just bad man shoots good man. It's a nation battling its own soul on the public stage.
It is the absolute definition of a deep dive.
But speaking of bad man shoots good man, we need to shift gears here. Because as profound as all that philosophy is, what makes Session 414 truly mind-bending is the specific, verifiable data Seth starts channeling about the crime itself.
Yes. This is the true crime chapter of the session, and we need to remind you listening of the context here. Jane is sitting in her living room in upstate New York. It is the night of the shooting. The internet does not exist. 24-hour news cycles are in their absolute infancy. Information is incredibly slow.
Right.
And yet Seth starts describing the assassin and the conspiracy with chilling accuracy.
Let's look at the assassin first. Sirhan. At this exact point in the evening, what did the public actually know?
Almost nothing. His name wasn't immediately released to the press. The details of his background were just starting to be investigated by confused police in Los Angeles. But Seth starts seeing and describing images.
What does he see?
He says he sees a small grocery store. And then he mentions a connection to a meeting in a place that somehow has to do with flowers. And he specifically uses the word dahlia.
A grocery store in a dahlia? That seems totally random at first glance.
It does, until you look at the facts that came out days later. Rob actually notes in the transcript that immediately after the session ended, they turned on the TV and saw a late-night interview with the owner of a small grocery store where Sirhan had worked.
Boom. Direct hit on the grocery store. What about the dahlia thing?
This is one of those incredibly weird synchronicities. There was a bar involved in the broader investigation called the Dahlia. Rob also notes there was a local bar in Elmira called the Dahlia, and Jane wondered later if Seth used that as an associative link.
Like grabbing a local image from Jane's subconscious to explain a distant factual connection.
Exactly. But the connection to flowers and the word dahlia regarding the suspect's movements or meetings was startlingly specific.
Seth also mentioned something about a mine establishment or something underground.
He says something underground. This likely refers to the secretive nature of the organization Sirhan was involved with. It wasn't a standard public political party, it was shadowy. Seth calls it an inner portion of an organization that is not a front organization, yet it's not what it seems to be either.
That sounds like classic conspiracy territory. And speaking of conspiracies, Seth dives right into the Arab connection.
Which again was barely a headline at that specific moment. Seth mentions an Arab connection and a meeting of three involving money. He says there is a foreign language involved.
And he starts naming names, or at least phonetic sounds.
This is the part that genuinely gave me chills when I read it. Seth mentions a brother of the assassin. He says, quote, one whose name has strong A sounds.
Strong A sounds. And what was Sirhan's brother's name?
Adele. Adele.
Wow. That is definitely a strong A sound.
And he mentions another name that comes through to Jane, like Farouk. Now, that's not totally precise to a specific conspirator, but it clearly points to the Middle Eastern origin and the specific naming conventions within that community, which, again, were not public knowledge in upstate New York that night.
He also spells out a word, C-A-C-H-E, cash.
He says, quote, C-H-E spelled out and more money to come, but it was known in advance it would not be delivered.
Whoa. So he's implying this was a paid hit, or at least that financial compensation was promised to someone.
He is strongly implying a transaction, a, quote, meeting of three joined first in a conspiracy. He mentions Jewish money might be involved, but in a very complex, counterintuitive way.
Yeah, that part of the transcript was confusing. He talks about the Arab-Jew conflict being more involved than it physically appears. Now, just to be clear, for you listening, we are not endorsing this specific geopolitical theory. We are just impartially unpacking what the original transcript says.
Exactly. We're just reporting Seth's words. He suggests that there might have been some knowledge on the part of certain groups. He specifically mentions some knowledge on the part of the Jews that this would happen, or that the political consequences of RFK's death would be beneficial to them, so warnings were intentionally prevented.
That is a massive, deeply controversial claim. He's suggesting a let-it-happen-on-purpose strategy.
It's ambiguous, as psychic data often is. He says, possibly some knowledge, not specific maybe, but suspected. It paints a picture of a brutal geopolitical chessboard where RFK was a pawn being actively removed, and various factions, Arab, Jewish, perhaps others, saw the benefit in his removal and simply looked the other way.
It certainly aligns with the lingering feeling many people had that there was far more to this than just a lone gunman acting impulsively in a kitchen.
Seth also mentions the name Garrison coming into the news again. Jim Garrison was the famous DA investigating the JFK assassination down in New Orleans. Seth links the two assassinations, suggesting a massive webwork of conspiracy. He keeps bringing up this inner portion of an organization.
It feels like we're listening to a psychic detective sifting through fragmented clues in real time. A meeting of three. A boy of 17. A 17th Street. It's disjointed, but it's incredibly specific.
It completely captures the chaos of the event. When you tap into a volatile reality like that clairvoyantly, you don't get a neatly typed police report. You get flashes of insight. You get Adele as strong A sounds. You get the image of Adalia. You get intense feelings of betrayal and unpaid cash money.
It's fascinating. And frankly, it lends so much credibility to the philosophical stuff we talked about earlier. Because if he's dead right about the grocery store and the brother's name, maybe we need to take his insights about the mass psyche seriously, too.
That's the undeniable power of the Seth Material. It constantly grounds the sweeping metaphysical concepts in hard, verifiable physical reality.
Now, speaking of the hard physical reality of RFK, at the exact time of the session, he was still alive, clinging to life in the hospital.
Yes. He didn't officially pass away until the early morning hours of June 6th.
But Seth, reading the transcript, Seth does not sound hopeful at all.
No. Seth is looking at the probabilities. This is a massive key concept in the Seth Material. The future isn't strictly fixed, but there are incredibly strong energetic currents.
What does he see happening physically inside RFK's body?
He describes the medical situation with alarming surgical precision. He mentions, quote, occlusion. He mentions pressure on a frontal lobe. And he specifically talks about severe damage to the rear portion of the brain, the cerebellum.
Was that publicly known at 9 p.m.?
The cerebellum damage was announced eventually after the massive surgery. But then Jane, speaking for Seth, mentions damage to the cerebrum, the forebrain, which absolutely had not been publicized yet.
So he's essentially seeing the physiological trauma in real time.
Yes. And he sees RFK's spirit fighting the trauma. He says there is a, quote, tremendous will to survive, a chance for rally. But he delivers this devastating line. He says his effectiveness and his role are completed.
Man, that is a heartbreaking sentence. His role is completed.
It ties directly back to the idea of him being a vessel for the national poison. He had absorbed the aggression, the horrific act was done, the symbol had been violently struck down. To survive would be to somehow undo the brutal teaching moment for the nation in a strange, cosmic way.
Seth mentions that he could theoretically live, but it would require a total, complete change in his soul's orientation.
Right. He says RFK could adapt in this life to another vital but different role. Basically, he would have to come back from the brink of death as a completely different man, spiritually speaking. He would have to abandon the political symbol role entirely. But Seth concludes, quote, I do not believe he has the strength for it.
And he didn't. He died just hours later.
But here is where it gets really interesting regarding the whole concept of the Kennedy curse. We always talk about JFK and RFK, but Seth brings up the other brothers.
The ones we don't talk about nearly as much in this context.
Specifically, Joe Kennedy Jr., the eldest brother. He died flying a bomber in World War II. He was the one the father, Joe Sr., originally groomed to be the first Catholic president.
The golden boy of the family.
Seth drops an absolute bombshell here. He says the eldest brother initially intended to take President Kennedy's role.
Okay, that's historically accurate. That was the family plan.
But Seth says the elder refused the role.
Refused it, like consciously.
He says, quote, he himself changed the probabilities purposely. Seth strongly implies that Joe Jr. saw what the role actually entailed, the destiny of being that vessel. Maybe on a deep soul level, maybe intuitively. And he said no, he opted out. He chose to die in the war instead of facing that specific political destiny.
Yeah, because he stepped out of line.
Quote, the probabilities thus changed. The two other brothers came into different positions of action.
So JFK and RFK essentially stepped into a massive vacuum left by Joe Jr.
Exactly. They took on a heavy psychic burden that wasn't originally meant to be theirs, and the immense crushing energy of that role, the vessel for the national poison, descended entirely on them.
That puts a whole new, incredibly dark spin on the family tragedies, like a mantle of doom that was passed down the line.
And then there's the third brother left, Ted Kennedy.
Right, what does Seth say about him? Remember the timeline here for you listening. This is 1969. Chappaquiddick hasn't happened yet. Ted is still young.
Seth says, quote, the third is frightened. He will remain in a passive capacity, relatively. I mean, just imagine being Ted Kennedy in that moment. Your eldest brother dies in a massive explosion in the war. Your second brother is shot in the head in Dallas. Your third brother is shot in a kitchen in L.A., and you are the last one standing bearing the entire weight of that family symbol.
The third is frightened. I would be utterly terrified.
And Seth predicts correctly that he would remain relatively passive regarding the presidency. Rob actually notes later in the published book that Ted soon announced he wouldn't run for president in the upcoming election. He stayed in the Senate. He didn't reach for the ultimate ring.
He didn't want to be the next vessel.
Who on earth could blame him?
This session. I mean, it's just relentless. It's national trauma, it's international conspiracy, it's family tragedy, it's severe medical trauma. It's so intense.
Which is exactly why what happens next in the session is so jarring and honestly so perfect.
The monster.
The monster.
Tell the listeners about the monster because this is vital context.
So right in the absolute middle of this intense, heavy channeling about the brutal assassination of a senator and the sickness of the American soul, there is a sudden physical racket in the living room.
A physical racket, like an interruption.
Yes. Jane and Rob's cat, whose name was literally the monster, which is a great cat name, by the way, gets himself completely stuck.
Where does he get stuck?
Behind the Venetian blinds. He's thrashing around, making a huge noise, probably hissing and clawing at the window.
This is high drama right here.
It is. And Seth, this vast cosmic entity who has just been dissecting the profound psychic illness of America, stops speaking. He looks at Rob through Jane's eyes, and he calmly says, quote, take your break and take care of your beloved monster.
Take care of your beloved monster. I love that so much.
It's so incredibly grounding. It reminds you that human life is this bizarre, constant mix of the profoundly cosmic and the utterly ridiculous. You can be discussing the death of a world statesman one minute and untangling a panicked cat from the blinds the next.
And Seth isn't annoyed. He's genuinely amused by it.
He's totally chill about it. He waits patiently while Rob frees the cat and puts him safely behind a closed door. It's a wonderful reminder that we are physical beings living in a physical world. The cosmic stuff is real, but the cats still need to be fed and the blinds still need to be fixed.
And speaking of the show going on,
yeah,
the session actually ends in a really unexpected way.
The postscript section.
Yeah. You normally think they'd wrap up a night like this with a final prayer or a really solemn thought about RFK's legacy. But what does Seth actually want to talk about before he leaves?
Rob's painting.
Rob's painting.
Rob asks him, quote, Have you got anything to say about the faces I've been painting lately? And Seth switches gears instantly. He goes from psychic detective to art critic.
Your technique is vastly improving, he tells him.
He connects Rob's current artistic work to a past life. He says Rob was an artist named Van Elver from the 14th century.
1317 to 1351, to be exact, according to the transcript.
Right. He beautifully describes the imagery of that past life. The velvet chair, the golden goblet, the heavy draperies. He's essentially telling Rob, hey, you are tapping into an old, deep skill set. Keep going with your art.
Why do you think he ends there? I mean, why end such an incredibly dark session with 14th century art criticism?
I think it's the ultimate core message of the entire Seth Material. You create your own reality. Violence happens, tragedy happens, national poison is violently ejected. But the creative force, that is the true constant. Life goes on. We paint pictures. We rescue cats from blinds. We learn. We grow.
We don't just dwell forever in the darkness. We
Yeah.
acknowledge it, we try to understand it, and then we have to create something new.
Exactly. Van Elver is painting through a plague in the 1300s. Rob is painting through assassinations in the 1960s. The creativity survives the tragedy every single time.
That is a really beautiful place to land. So let's clearly recap what we've unpacked today for you listening.
We've got three main massive takeaways. First, the philosophy of violence. Violence isn't just random bad luck. It's a terrifying symptom of a sick mass psyche trying desperately to heal itself by ejecting pent-up aggression.
Second, the danger of national schizophrenia. The immense danger of preaching high ideals you don't actually practice. If you mouth peace but routinely wage war, that hypocritical energy will eventually snap back on you and strike down the very symbols of your fake ideals.
And third, the sheer mystery of it all. The incredible, specific, real-time clairvoyance of Seth, seeing the physical clues, the Arabic names, the hidden cache of money, and the geopolitical dynamics of the crime before the local police even had their morning coffee.
It's a true masterclass in viewing reality from the inside out.
It really is.
So here's the provocative thought I want to leave you with today. Something to mull over. If Seth is right, if national tragedies are indeed surgical attempts to heal our mass psyche,
Here comes a really scary question.
what poison are we trying to eject right now? Just look at the news today. Look at the intense conflicts, the endless scandals, the cultural tension. What is the current symptom trying to desperately tell the patient?
And the follow-up to that is, are we actually listening to the symptom, or are we just trying to blindly suppress it again?
That is the ultimate question.
If you want to dive deeper into this, and believe me, we only barely scratched the surface of the Seth Material today, you need to go directly to the source.
Absolutely you do. We are reading from the Early Sessions, Book 8. You can find this specific book and all the other amazing Seth books published by the New Awareness Network.
Their website is incredibly helpful. It's sethcenter.com/the-early-sessions, but just go to sethcenter.com.
We really want to thank the folks at New Awareness Network for keeping this vital material in print. It is essential reading for anyone who wants to understand, well, basically everything about how reality works.
Truly essential.
So to all of you listening, keep your eyes open, keep your ideals real. And remember, you do not need a permission slip to be who you truly are.
See you next time on The Deep Dive.
Thanks for listening.